Okay, you'll notice that I already have some Chrono Trigger sprites open up on the screen, along with a third, well, fourth sprite, and that's a custom one I built using those Chrono Trigger sprites as a template, uh, specifically Chrono. And you can kind of see a little bit of difference between their sprite and my sprite, where I've chosen to either widen some features or completely disregard some of the other ones. And what I'm doing right now is I've created a new document with the same pixel dimensions as the other sprites, and I'm just kind of organizing the interface around to make it a little bit easier for me to work and reference the other sprites at the same time. So I'll probably move my finished one down below because I won't be using that as much, and then moving the other one right next to Chrono so I can get a better understanding of proportions. And I've gone ahead and disabled the background layer. I don't know why I did that. You don't have to do that. It's just for some reason having some continuity there is very helpful. And plus it helps a little bit with building your sprite to see how it's going to work in transparency and not exactly against a white background, because your sprite can be against other backgrounds. And usually where I like to start is by drawing some grid lines to help establish where the body boundaries are. So I like to start with the midsection first, and then I do the top of the shoulders. That kind of marks the boundaries where the arms will be. And I also like to do the top of the head so I leave enough room for the character's hair. And then one right below, down by the ankles. And that's just, it helps give me enough room to draw feet, which is something I always overlook. And then I end up for only maybe like 3 pixels of space for drawing feet, and it's actually pretty annoying. So drawing this out early on is very helpful. And where I usually start is that midsection. So I'm drawing the belt area first, and I'm starting out with the same width as Chrono's midsection. I'm going to make that a little bit wider later on. And then up above there, I'm starting out with the chin. And what I'm doing there is I'm just pretty much mimicking exactly what it looks like with Chrono's sprite. He has a very narrow chin, and it's actually pretty ubiquitous among all the other character sprites, especially for the NPCs in Chrono Trigger. You'll notice Magus's face actually doesn't have that sharp of a chin, despite his character art having very sharp features. But I think part of it is that his cape is obscuring that area. So in some cases that doesn't work. And I'm also filling in the ears just to make sure I don't forget those. That's something that you also see a lot in Chrono Trigger, is these sprites actually have room for ears, whereas in the Final Fantasy sprites they don't. However, what is similar to Final Fantasy is the fact that they place the eyes right at the sides of the head. And it's usually just 2 pixels, or 4x4 rather, where it's 2 pixels for the pupil and then 2 pixels for the whites of the eyes. And then you kind of do this, Tetris L shape for the eyebrows. And right now I'm giving him orange eyebrows because I imagine this character being blonde, but I'm going to actually go back and change that color because it's bleeding too much into the skin tones. So I'm just going to go ahead and make it darker. And that's one thing to just constantly look at, is to make sure that the sprite will look okay at its, native resolution. The subtle details might be more apparent when you're zoomed in at like 1600%, but when you zoom back out, they might get lost. So what I'm doing here now is I'm picking a color for the character's shirt, and I realize that my guides are actually that same color, so I'm going to go ahead and change those to a different color just so I can distinguish, what are guidelines and what are the actual shirt. And the other thing I'm going to do here is kind of define this midline going down. And what I usually like to do also is kind of do like a little stick figure thing, but at this point I've been drawing this kind of template so many times that it's kind of become second nature. I'd encourage everybody to kind of go through and at least draw like 3 or 4 of these types of sprites, because you're inevitably going to fuck up a lot of times. But as you do it more and more and just keep on doing it and repeating, it gets a lot easier, and you start doing things from muscle memory, and it makes it a lot easier. So what I did here is I widened the waist just because Chrono's waist is so tight in this, and it's really just something to kind of accent the kind of garb he's wearing at top. But since my character's wearing a t-shirt, we're not going to have that bit of a tight waistline. And then I'm also drawing the arms, or at least the outline of the inside of the arms and the hands there. I'm just putting there for memory, so I just remind myself that I can't draw my shirt out anymore. And I'm pretty much using Chrono's hands as a template there. And you'll notice there's a little gap between Chrono's arms and his top layer of clothing there. Since I widened the waist on my character, we don't have that luxury, so it's just going to be kind of side-by-side black items. One's going to be the outline of the shirt, and one's going to be the actual outline of his arms. And you can actually see that in the sample character I did down below. And like I've been doing previously, I've been filling in a lot of the color details as I've been going along. I don't know why it's easier for me to do it. I think it's because I like to see how the thing will look at least partially shaded before I commit to an outline. And furthermore, picking the base colors also allows me to pick my outline color, because what I'll do is I'll pick a base color there with my color picker, and then I'll actually either lighten or darken the color to either use for the shading or the outlines. So right there, the outlines are going to be kind of a dark brown, which is kind of going to be the shadow portion of the skin shade. And I'm also giving my character a pair of khaki pants. I'm planning on them being cargo pants, but at this level, we don't know how much detail we can put into it, but we'll see how we can pull it off here. But once again, going back into the outlines, you'll notice in the Chrono Trigger sprites, the actual outlines aren't 100% black. They actually are just really, really low-level versions of the color that they are filled with. So his cape in Megas in his cape, rather, he has a very kind of dark purple indigo type of color cape. And you just look at the outline there, and it's actually just a much, much darker version of that color. And that type of shading kind of keeps the character from looking too uniform. And it also will prevent it from, having too stark of a contrast against, light backgrounds or dark backgrounds. So there I finished the outline for the pants. I'm not going to do too much with it just yet because I want to get those hands filled in. And then the trick is to get the t-shirt going strong, and it's right where the sleeves are. That's always the problem for me. And where I usually begin is I like to go to where the armpits are and kind of just draw a diagonal line going up, kind of like that. And the problem is that it looks kind of like a cutoff at that point. So what I'll do is kind of lessen the slope of that diagonal line. Because right now he looks like he's wearing, football pads or, some kind of spacesuit, which is obviously not what the intended effect is. So I'm going and just filling this all in right now just to kind of get a better big picture of, what the orange is going to look like. And I'm actually going to change that orange out a little bit later just because it doesn't jive well with all the skin tones in the khaki pants. But you see there where I lessened the slope of the line for the sleeves, so now it's a little bit more flat. And then I also rounded out the shoulders a little bit by, taking out that last corner pixel on both sides to give it a more rounded corner feel. And now I'm just kind of figuring out how I'm going to deal with the neck area. And really in these sprites there is no neck, so you kind of have to fudge it a little bit. So I'm just kind of taking the sleeves right there, and where they meet up in the trapezoid area, I'm just kind of dropping the shirt down a little bit. And the character looks a little bit crazy right now, and I'm adding some highlights just to see what the character will look like with just some rudimentary highlights. And obviously I'm using the right as my source of lights, and it's actually the top right. And it's something it's something that's often overlooked when making sprites. And since we have the luxury of using as many colors as we want, we can really go as wild as we please. And then here I'm just going to kind of roughly block in the hair. The character is going to look really kind of like a buff girly character right now. And I will go back and retouch that hair. But right now I just kind of, I've kind of committed myself to the character having a really big hairdo. And so I just want to fill it in, see what it looks like, and see what I can do later to refine it. So right there, I've given the character just kind of a rudimentary helmet of hair. And I've gone ahead and moved the sprite up a little bit because I'm going to need room for those shoes. And I've obviously taken the pants and ended them below the line or the guideline that I've given myself. And that's okay. I have a lot of room up top, so I can easily just shift my sprite up and work down below with those newly available pixels. And right there, I'm just trying to work out the scalp line for the hair. Like I said, this is all pretty rough, and I think everybody kind of will expect their early art to look like this, especially people are newer to making pixel art like I am. And then this is the part where I'm just throwing in some lighter colors, some highlight colors. Not really committed to them right now, but what I want to do is just lay them down so I can use them for the color picker later. And that really, I think that's the overarching reason why I tend to throw down color a lot before I commit to an outline, just because I can have easy access to those colors. And right there, I'm adding the highlights to the pants. I know that khaki pants tend to be a very matte thing, but you still have light and shadow attached to them, and it's okay when you have that unintended, shiny look, because the specular highlights you get with your characters, the specular highlights you get with your characters are just kind of a consequence because you don't have much room to blend. So the pants are looking pretty good. I'm looking at the shirt right now, and I'm starting to add in little shadows here and there. And as I'm increasingly adding them, I'm starting to feel that the orange shirt just isn't jiving. And in my mind, I'm kind of figuring out, like, should I make the shirt darker? And I'm not really sure if I should do that. So I just kind of go back to the hair and kind of think about it for later. What I'm doing is I'm just kind of building up the hair a little bit. I'm still not really sure how I want the hair to look. I think I'm going to probably settle on a spiky kind of look, just because I have a lot of room to work on that hair. But for right now, I just kind of give him like this kind of smooth hairstyle, and I'm just kind of playing with different ideas. And I'm trying, doing the vertical lines up to kind of give it like a maybe like Guile from Street Fighter type of look, or just kind of peppering it just to see how it looks like if it's just a general kind of haircut that you can't really tell what style it is. And I think in the end, I kind of went with this Guile look, and you can see that it's kind of level across the top. And what I think I'll do is probably roughen that up a little bit to give it a little bit more of a spiky look. And I've gone ahead and shifted my sprite up to the top so I can start working on the feet. And these feet are actually going to be a little bit different than how I did them earlier in the other sprite. So you can see in the sprite below, I have them going out at oblique angles. And this one, I'm just doing a sideways thing just because I just kind of wanted to see how they'd look, actually, to be honest. Obviously, if you're going for like a production value, you might want to go with something that's probably oblique, just because you want to sell that three-dimensional look where the character's looking downwards, or south, I guess, as a direction. And I've gone ahead and chosen to use black for the shoes, and this is right where I start zooming out to see what the sprite looks like. And I can really see that the orange shirt is just kind of making the whole thing a little too monotonous. So I'm looking at the color. I'm trying to think, should I darken it? Should I lighten it? I don't know. I'm pretty convinced that I just need to actually move to a different kind of color. So I'm trying to think of a good color that would go with that khaki and with blonde hair. And I think I'm going to probably settle on a nice blue color. And I'm definitely going to go a little bit darker just so there's some contrast in values. So I quickly just go in there with the fill tool and just fill up that initial block. And then I'm starting to fill in all the different colors. And you can see how I go darker for some of the shadow colors. And you'll also notice this isn't really completely pertinent to pixel art, but just in general in color theory. Found that highlights and shadows tend to work with a factor of saturation as well. So the lighter you tend to go, the less saturated your color will be, and the darker you go, the more saturated it will be. So it's not something that exactly will show up too well in pixel art, but it's still a good habit to have, especially if you're doing things like matte painting. Um, and it's actually almost imperative when you're trying to actually color light. Just because light sources, right at the source, it's almost like a white, unsaturated look. So back to the topic at hand, I decided to give my guy a belt here. So I'm just giving him a little black belt, and I'm just going to give him kind of a silver belt buckle. It's kind of similar to how Chrono has his belt set up with kind of that gold or bronzish looking belt buckle. And then I go ahead and zoom out just to see what he looks like at, normal zoom, and then zoom him back in. And, right at this process, I'll be zooming in and out a lot. You're completely welcome to do that at any point in your process, whatever is comfortable for you. I'm just kind of showing you what my flow is like. And I don't try not to get too worried about it early on, just because then I'll find myself reworking everything and I'll never get done. And especially since this was an example done just to kind of show people, how to make a quick sprite. I definitely didn't want to be caught up in, down in the weeds with that kind of stuff. So now I'm trying to add in, just the hints of like maybe cargo pockets and the actual pockets there. And I zoom out and can't really see them, but you can still see kind of a hint of them. So I probably just leave them in. And finally, I'm just going to start breaking up the hair a bit to make it look a little less, vanilla ice, circa 1990. So I'm trying to, create these little grooves in here. And they're kind of hard because you still want to preserve kind of that outline there. But also you still want to have the hair broken up into little spikes. And they pulled it off pretty well with Chrono Trigger because they kind of give it this perspective look where the spikes go out in different directions. In this case, this is a super simple sprite, and I'm definitely not somebody that wants to, rip off Akira Toriyama too much. So I'm just going to try to go for like a simple spike look, and I'll zoom in and zoom out and constantly just tweak and tweak and tweak. And eventually, I think we're going to get to a finished product. The first thing I'm going to do is try to play with some highlights on the shirt and see how they look. That example there kind of looks a little too weird because it almost looks like the character has a decal. And what I want to get to is just have a little bit extra highlight just kind of across the chest just to give a little bit more depth to the character. And I think I'm actually pretty happy with that there. So I go ahead and zoom back out, maybe add some more shadows here and there. I take out a highlight just below the neck just to kind of preserve the verisimilitude of the light source coming from the top right.